It's my pleasure to be here to speak to everyone today, and it's really great to hear so many passionate Christian business owners share their stories and also share their insights on how their faith aligns with their business. And I'll give an introduction of myself. Right now, I wrapped up my doctorate at the University of Oxford. I specifically looked at social solidarity of communities. So I looked at why communities gather together, why they break apart, and how do people interact to be more than the sum of their parts. So it's not 1 + 1 = 2, it's 1 + 1 equals so much more because of the interaction between the people. And so it's great to hear about how businesses are out there to talk about and to actually execute their mission of impacting and changing lives. And that's exactly what we do here. So at Azurian Coaching and Consulting, that's the name of my company, we are in the business of changing fate. Now let me explain, because I know this is a Christian conference. So this is my family, right? And we took this over the summer in Hong Kong. My lovely wife over there and our 3 kids. And I love my family a lot, but this almost never happened. When my second daughter was born in 2011, at that time, I was in South Korea. I was teaching at an international school. I was department head of the social studies department. And at that time, I had so much on my plate. I need to look at the list here, right, because there's so much on my plate. I was organizing school trips to China. I was an IB examiner. My daughter was just born. I was wrapping up my first master's degree while also applying for my doctorate. And meanwhile, my school was also going through a financial crisis where we do not know if we were going to be paid the next day or whether our job will still be there. And at that time, I was also involved in planning a missions conference in Thailand for second generation Chinese all around the world. And what happened was, when I was in Thailand, I started having these red spots on my waist. And I was like, oh, what's going on? It's beginning to hurt, right? But at that time, because I had so much on my plate, what I did was I just grind through everything. I powered through everything. That's my modus operandi. And I figured, hey, you know what? I got a pretty high pain tolerance. I'll just put it off, It's probably just some bugs or some fleas biting me at night or whatever, and it's in Thailand, so who knows. But over time, it started to hurt a lot. And after a week, I decided, hey, I need to go to the hospital, right? I needed to get emergency help. And so I went in the hospital, and when I saw the doctor told me, John, if you didn't come in today, you'd be dead the next day. Apparently, I had shingles, right? And if you don't know what shingles are, shingles is essentially when you're small and you're young, you have chicken pox. Chicken pox never really goes away. What it does is it goes dormant, and when your immune system drops to a certain level, it comes back with a vengeance. And putting it off could be life-threatening. It attaches itself to your nerves, and it hurts a lot. And so when I found that out, I was like, oh my goodness, this is crazy, right? And then suddenly, the doctor decided to rush me into their system. I was on the bed. They stuck an IV in me, and I was out cold. I was out cold for a whole week. I have no idea what happened after that, right? Apparently, my mom was there at the time, and she took care of me. And I was under morphine, and the photo here is me being out cold and her taking a picture of me being out cold. But at that time, my mom also FaceTimed my daughter, and it was my oldest daughter. She was 2 at that time, and here she is holding her bowl, and I'm just out. And then this is me when I've gotten better, and I'm sitting up. But at that time, I felt like a total failure. It's because I thought I could just do anything, I can just power through everything. But when I got out of the hospital, it was so painful that I couldn't even hold my own newborn daughter. And I felt ashamed. I felt I let them down. Can you imagine not being able to hold your newborn daughter? I don't want anybody to ever feel like that. So when Ricky yesterday was talking about how his elastic band was stretched to the limit, my elastic band pretty much snapped at that time. My body could not keep up with the amount of work I was doing. And I don't wish this situation on anybody. So, of course, while all this was happening, I wasn't thinking about, all this. And you always give meaning to your experiences after they've passed. So one of the things that we're now doing as you're in coaching and consulting is coaching people to break out of these negative cycles and these spirals. And essentially, when I say we're in a business of changing fate, it's about, in Chinese, it's called Ming Wan or Ming Yun, right? You break that two words apart. Ming is basically what your life would be if you don't do anything about it. The natural course it would take based on your predisposition, how you are born and what you would naturally do in certain situations. And the other part, one, is your opportunities and the things you run into that lead you to doing what you do and the choices that are available to you. And so when I say we're in the business of changing fate, what I mean is we're in the business of intervening with people's personalities, because personalities are cycles and they create cyclical behaviors. And so let me tell you a little bit about the science of personality. Personality, as we know it since the 1990s, is mostly nature, meaning it's linked to how your genes express themselves in your body chemistry. It is for life, you are born with it, and an example would be if a baby is in the mother's womb and the baby moves a lot, right? That baby is probably an extrovert. When that baby is 80 years old, that person would still be an extrovert. Basically, your level of extroversion sticks with you throughout your whole life, and so does all the other aspects of personality. So, right now, this is what we call the big 5 personality traits. And within the field of psychology, it's the golden standard. So if you open Google Scholar nowadays and you look up big 5 personality, and you look up anything personality, it's pretty much all of it is going to be using the big 5 personality traits or the 5-factor model. And so it's clear. So to give you a quick breakdown, trait openness. Trait openness is how open you are to new ideas. That's regulated by your dopaminergic system. So how much dopamine in your system you have to go and explore and learn new things. You have trait conscientiousness, which is actually the second highest predictor of financial success next to IQ. So after IQ, the highest predictor of financial success is trait conscientiousness. And that is the amount of focus that you can put on a single task. There's extroversion, which is also highly correlated to financial success. Extroverts who go out and meet people a lot, who are always on the go, are able to, get more done in their business. And of course, the opposite end of that are introverts. And in the middle, you have what we call the ambiverts, which is actually what most of the world is constituted of. Most of us are in the middle. There's agreeableness, the personality trait for how much you prioritize group harmony and how much energy you have to, fight for what you want. And trait neuroticism is the stress tolerance that you have when, things get stressful. So all these things, all of these 5 essential elements is what constitutes personality science today, and it's the golden standard. And there are combinations that can happen. So let me give you some examples. And, I'm positive that all of you guys can probably think of some people when I start giving these examples. So a typical example that we see in the workplace are stressed workers who are too nice, people who are too nice. So if they're high in trait agreeableness, so they like to, they don't like to say no to people, and they're also not really conscientious. So they're good at multitasking, but if you tell them to focus on something, it can get pretty hard, right? And they don't have that many systems in place. And they're also slightly higher in trait neuroticism, which means they're slightly more vulnerable to stress. So what happens is this person is in the workplace and the boss walks over and drops a stack of paper, hey, do this. Or their colleagues, give them, hey, can you do this for me? They would have a hard time saying no. And relative to everyone else, they would have a harder time to say no. And what happens is that they will start over-promising and under-delivering. And as a result, that elastic band will stretch, and eventually it may snap. Or one day that person will finally be really angry and say, you know what, I've had enough of this. And everyone's like, what's going on? Like, you've always been okay with this. But it's about that elastic band, right? When will it snap? And being able to recognize your personality and preempting that and stopping that from happening is essential. Another combination would be the difference between leaders and managers, right? You guys recognize this guy? You know who he is? Elon Musk, right? The guy at Tesla. I like to think of him as kind of like the modern Steve Jobs, right? He's got a lot of great ideas, and he's a leader in his field of electric cars and pretty much anything else that he puts his head towards. Elon Musk is extremely high in what we call trait openness. So he's really creative. He has a lot of energy to think up new things and find new ways to do different things and figure out solutions and explore new markets. But in this incident here, he was on Joe Rogan podcast, the #1 podcast in America, and Joe Rogan was like, "Hey, why don't you smoke a blunt?" And he dared him, and he's like, "Okay, fine, I'll do it." Right? So he smoked some marijuana on the program, and it was on YouTube with 10 million views last time I checked or something like that. And basically, the Tesla stocks were like, right? And what's happening is that leaders usually are creative. The people who start their businesses are creative entrepreneurs. They're out to explore new markets. They don't mind taking risks. But what happens is when the business takes off and there are shareholders involved, I have some Tesla stock, and I was hit by this. When shareholders are involved, the managers who are lower in trade openness, and that's the main difference, by the way, between leaders and managers. Leaders are high in trade openness, managers are lower in trade openness, and that's pretty much it. Everything else, they're similar to one another. Managers are about keeping KPIs, making sure that progress is being kept up. But when you have a leader that's doing this, it's hard to deliver the goods. And so what I'm trying to say is that personality, your predisposition is a spiral. It can spiral up. So Elon Musk, his creativity has taken him and Tesla to great heights, but at the same time, it could spiral down, right? A typical example of a problem that you'll see among many entrepreneurs is that they have so many creative ideas and they focus on so many different things, but they end up focusing on nothing. And that's why their businesses don't take off, because they're always out there exploring new things. And so one of the major recommendations I would make to people who are just starting their business when I do coaching with teams is, you know what? Yeah, you're a leader, and by definition, the fact that you're an entrepreneur means that you're generally higher in trade openness. I would recommend someone to, get someone who is lower in trade openness who can actually implement the plans for you, because that would make or break your team. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is that everyone's needs are unique, right? Everyone's needs are unique, and everyone needs a tailored solution to their own cycles that they get into. And so there's a solution to this. The solution is essentially, number one, raising self-awareness. By being aware of your personality and the situations that you can tend to get yourself into, you're able to recognize the cues that, hey, I'm going down a road that may not be a very nice place, and I better turn myself around. The second thing that you can do about personality is develop soft skills on the other end of the continuum. So if you're really good at focusing, you focus a lot, right, and you are able to deliver the goods, but at the same time, you don't really know how to implement, and you can't really sit down and focus. You're too good at focusing and you can't multitask, then doing things like setting apart time to explore, to have some unstructured time would be essential to that person's success. So developing soft skills and systems around you to support your personality is essential. This is important. People are becoming increasingly important. Education, what I studied and what I worked on in the past decade, has essentially shifted from the Chicago system, where it's factories and people line up, they do their assembly line, they do their hammer thing, move on to the next person, they do their hammer thing, and they move on to the next. Like, that's not how the future is gonna be. What the future is gonna be, it's about innovation, it's about working with people, it's about increasing the services, and it's about the soft skills, right? So if you are to be innovative, like Ricky said yesterday, if you're not into the game, if your head's not into the game, you can't really be creative. You can't be creative. And so by raising the self-awareness, people can become innovative and have the motivation to work harder and produce better results. And so essentially our services involve raising self-awareness, developing leadership capacities, identifying ideal career paths, and improving people's working styles, whether it's in learning or in the workplace, in education or in the workplace. And we do this with both individuals and groups. So one problem that we've identified in Canada, and one problem that we're out there to solve right now, is the Canadian counseling crisis. It's actually not a Canadian problem, it's a global problem. In fact, it's worse in the US. What we're finding in Canada, a typical high schools, and average high schools, counselor to student ratio is currently about 400 to 1, right? So for every 400 students, there's only one high school counselor. For higher education, it's worse. For small colleges, 850 students to 1. For large universities, you're talking about 1,600 students to 1 counselor. And the problem on top of that is that most of the work is now done on mental health or admissions counseling for the high school level. So it's about getting into the getting into the top universities for high schools, or about taking care of people's mental health. But one thing that we strongly believe in, and especially in the Chinese market, that's a huge market, admissions counseling, is that what's the point of going to Harvard if you don't want to do what you're studying for? And that's one thing that we're out there to push towards schools, is career coaching, right? That's one of the projects that we're taking on this year, in that we're gonna reach out to schools and, hey, let us work with the students and help them figure out their career. We have a program that we can work with them so that they can figure out their career, so that they can be motivated in doing what they do. Not everyone needs to go to university, right? Not everyone needs to go to university. There's a lot of businesses out there that does not require a university degree, and you can get extremely good results. And so it's about human flourishing and thriving, like Brian said earlier. So I want to wrap up with a Bible verse from the scripture, is that you alone created my inner being. You knitted me together inside my mother. I will give thanks to you because I have been so amazingly and miraculously made. Your works are miraculous, and my soul is fully aware of this. And essentially, each of us are unique. Each of our personalities are unique, and we're out there in the business to fixing fate. That's it.